Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park Conservative Temple, Highland Park, New Jersey, Highland Park Conservative Temple, Congregation on Shemet, and joining me and my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, live from Jerusalem, where it is late, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, who is in New York City, Anshe Emet in New York City.
You take care of the truth. I'll take care of the kindness.
Oh my God! Okay, see, this is our like 100 and something broadcast. Anyway, big shout out! A lot of birthdays in the Barry Chesler household, right? Happy birthday to all!
Yes, Elisa is 27 today. Rafi on Thursday will be 29, and Galit will be 16 on. No, I'm all messed up. I think it's Friday and Sunday.
All right,
19th, 22nd, and 24th.
Beautiful. We want to say a big hello to our friends at Machane Ramah in the Berkshires, where we are now in our, I don't know how many years of doing the Parsha Talk. We are missing you, but we are looking forward to having you hear us talk about this amazing Parsha. Parsha Pinchas. Pinchas, the Parsha named for this individual, one of the few Parshiot in the Torah that are named for individuals. We don't have to go through the trivia right now. But just can we give the footnote about Pinchas without going too much in giving too much detail? We met Pinchas last week because of what, Rabbi Kalmanovsky?
Well, we got to have a little detail, but
sure.
you can't do without a little bit of detail. But I will introduce it. Like one of the things we said in the run up is that this parsha is about Pinchas, although the thing that Pinchas is most famous for happened in last week's reading, and there may be, in fact, a contrast, kind of a critical contrast between what he is famous for and the other kinds of leadership that people hold. Short form, the Midianites, after the whole business with the Moabites last week, and the Midianites are portrayed as a team. The king of Moab, Balak, he speaks to the Ziknei Midian, the elders of Midian, to try to work out how they can hold back, this Israelite onslaught. And when Bilam's cursing thing doesn't work, or Bilam is moved to bless instead of curse, they try something else, and they try a kind of sexual thing. There's a kind of orgiastic scene in which the Israelite men and the Midianite women are getting to know each other, and there's one prince, Zimri ben Salu, and this one Midianite princess, Cosbi Batsur, and they are flagrantly demonstrating that they would like these people to merge. And Pinchas, they're in such a position that Pinchas takes a spear and kills them both with one single spear blow. Okay, so you can imagine how he could get one spear blow through two people. And in this act of zealous rage, then that turns back the divine rage. Now, Pinchas is therefore kind of known throughout throughout Jewish lore as the person who is totally full of righteous rage, zealous rage, but it spills over into violence. And then today's parsha begins that God says a praiseworthy thing, Pinchas heshiv et chamati, you diverted my anger, velo chiliti et bnei Israel b'kinati, and I was going to destroy the whole people, but Pinchas diverted my anger. So therefore, I give him briti shalom, my covenant of peace. God says about Pinchas. I would say that in that idea of giving my covenant of peace, there's a not so, not too hard to see, a little bit of backhanded criticism there, that Pinchas didn't really act very peacefully. And I would say that in Talmud says, Pinchas shelo b'ritzon chachamim. Talmud says very clearly, Pinchas did not, Pinchas's behavior did not accord with what the sages would have wanted. And I'm with you. I think that this Taliban-y kind of, you have to kill the people who are doing the things that you think are wrong that doesn't represent rabbinic Judaism with its very moderate discourse. We talk about things. We don't take spears. And so I find it hard to like wave the Pinchas flag.
No, I think we're all in agreement on this act of zeal. In fact, I would try and understand the fact that he gets placed in the sanctuary, Brit Keunat Olam, and that in a way that's to try and contain that zeal and to channel that in the way that will be least dangerous to the population. In other words, you can stay inside the sanctuary. It's not a penalty. It's not the penalty box, but it's a box that holds him and that channels that whatever that impossible impulse is, um, in order for that impulse not to take root and become the mainstream. Extremism exists, and this is something that we learn. We see it around us. But when it inhabits the mainstream, that's when it becomes really, really problematic for all of us. Barry.
What I would add here is that we lose sight in our discussion of Pinchas when we focus on his zeal of God's jealousy. So the verse says, "Bekano et kinati," that Pinchas is zealous against my jealousy. That's God talking. And one of the things that we have to think about, had Pinchas not acted, God's anger at the people would have resulted in even more death. It's instructive, Jeremy, as you were noting, the way the rabbis divide the parshiot. So 24,000 people die in the last verse of last week's parsha. And here, Pinchas is going to get the covenant of peace, which admittedly, as you point out, is nuanced. But I think that we have to take into account the divine rage here, and that Pinchas, his zeal matches God's rage, and perhaps he's put in the sanctuary because he has to protect the people from God. And therefore he can offset God in the sanctuary so that God doesn't spill out into the people to their great harm.
Interesting.
Can I say, by the way, we talked again before the started recording that there's, maybe we'll get to this in the course of our discussion, that there's some variations about the Haftarot at this time of year. There's a Haftarah that's associated with Pinchas. It's not all that often read, and in most American synagogues you won't be reading it this week. Although in Israeli synagogues where the Torah readings are a little bit discrepant between America because of the calendar and the second day of Shavuot this year, the 8th day of Pesach and the second day of Shavuot. The Haftarah is the story of Eliyahu Hanavi, who this is also the Haftarah for Ki Tisha. It's another part of the cycle, but it's a well-known passage. He puts the prophets of Baal to a test. He defeats them. He kills, I think, 400 or 500 or a whole lot of prophets of Baal. He's a bloody guy, and unsurprisingly, the powers that be, King Achav and Queen Izebel, Ahab and Jezebel, they chase him away. He runs away to the desert. He runs away to this very place, to Mount Chorev, where Moshe got the Torah. And then he has this great, incredibly powerful passage in which God says, what are you doing here? And they'll speak, and I'll say in a minute what he says. But then God passes by in a fire, but God, he comes out on the cliff, and a fire passes by, but God is not in the fire. And then a great wind, God is not in the great wind. And then the great rash and the great earthquake, and God is not in the earthquake. And after the wind, I guess, is the last one. Kol d'mama daka, the still small voice, or the still sound of silence, or something like that. But when God confronts Eliyahu and says, "Malachapo Eliyahu, what are you doing here?" Eliyahu says, "Vayomer kano kineti ladunai Elohei tzevaot ki azvu britecha bnei Yisrael et mizbechotecha harasu v'neviecha haragu b'charev ve'ivater ani levadi ve'ivakesh et nafshi lekachta." So Eliyahu says to God, I have been zealous, kanokineti. I have been zealous for you, for the God of hosts, for your people Israel has abandoned your covenant, and they've destroyed your altar, and they've killed your prophets, and I alone am left. Uh, Eliyahu speaks with that Pinchasian kind of zeal. And in fact, in the Jewish mystical tradition, I'm not sure if this is in the conventional rabbinics, but it's definitely in the Zohar. It says Pinchas hu Eliyahu, or Eliyahu hu Pinchas, whatever, that they are the same character in a kind of reincarnated fashion, that's like one guy, the guy who killed the Midianite and the guy who kills the prophets of Baal. That's like a single character.
Do you know what? It's so interesting. I'm just before you that at the Brit Milah, the first sentences, the first verses that we chant at a Brit Milah are Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron Kohen Eshiv Chamati, right? Me'al b'nei Yisrael b'kanoet kinati b'tocham. We invoke Pinchas at a Brit Milah, and we invoke Eliyahu at a Brit Milah. You know,
yeah, that's exactly out of that same midrashic theme.
Because they're the same guy. But
it's an extreme.
There's a kind of role reversal here that's interesting in light of a later part of the Parsha, because I think most of us would associate the bearer of divine rage with the prophet, not with the priest.
Yeah.
But the prophet here, as Jeremy mentioned, it's called the Mamadaka. The so far removed from violence, you could barely hear anything. And the priest, we would associate, I think, more with peace. Certainly there are traditions going back to Pinchas's grandfather Aharon that the Kohen represents peace. It's part of the priestly blessing. The rabbinic tradition, Aaron is the Rodev Shalom. And here we have a reversal, and it's instructive when we think about chapters 28 and 29, which are the Korbanot, the most priestly part of the holiday service, the detail of all the sacrifices, that perhaps we're supposed to see an element of zeal in the way that we perform the sacrifices.
Interesting. All right, so let's move on from.
Wait, say one last thing, just to correct my mistake. The order of those things that Elijah sees is wind, earthquake, and fire, and it's after fire is the last one. So we're talking about the Holy Bible. At least you should get the details right. So
nice. Okay, so speaking of the details, we got a lot of details in the Parsha, the census, with a little bit of family history sprinkled in there. We have this the account of the daughters of Tzalafchad. I know we spoke about that in a previous year, where these Tzalafchad dies without any male heirs, and his daughters come before Moses asking for their inheritance. And fast forward, Moses petitions God for the answer as to what to do in such a situation, and in fact, these women are granted inheritance. But then we move into this very, very interesting passage where God says to Moses, Ale el har ha'avarim hazeh. Go up to this mountain, Har ha'avarim, this mount of what? How would you translate that? Transitions, mount of avarim.
the cross. Well, it's great because it is the border or the crossover.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go there, and is that going to be Mount Nevo, right? In the end, Ure'eh et haaretz. Go see the land asher natati livnei Yisrael, that I am going to give to the children of Israel. V'ra'ita ota, and you shall see the land. V'ne'asafta el amecha, and you will be gathered to your kin, to your people. Gam ata, you too. Kasher nasaf Aaron achicha, just as Aaron, your brother, was gathered to his people. Okay, so this is not an easy couple of verses to read, especially if you're Moses, right? And I do want to read these verses with some intentional pauses here, because there's a lot of pathos here. There's a lot of emotion. At least I'm reading it. I interpret it with a lot of emotion. The emotion of seeing the land and knowing that you're not going to go into the land. The emotion, of course, that you're going to die, and the emotion that this death is somehow going to be compared to your brother's death. So I want to just let's talk about the first one, which is go up to the mountain and see the land, and remind us, Barry, remind us. Moses is not going into the land, and do you think that there is an internal struggle in Moses as to I want to get into the land, and I'm not going to be satisfied just by seeing it?
There is a great deal of pathos here. But the idea that Moses is going to look at the land recalls for us the earlier appearances of this idea that of the land that I will show you, which Abraham is told, Lech Lecha, you're to go to the land that I will show you, which becomes the land of Canaan. And when he goes to the Akedah, he's told to go to the land that I will show you once again. And in both cases, in chapter 12 and in chapter 22, things don't happen quite the way that certainly Abraham expects them to be. The land of promise is not quite the promise that one would have believed it to be, because very quickly Abraham is going to leave the land to go into Egypt because the land cannot support him. And depending on what you think happened at the Akedah, I don't know that Abraham came away from that as ennobled as some people think. That there is something quite diminishing about raising a knife against your son, no matter what you do next. But what's most important here, I think, is a comparison of Aaron's death with Moses, because Moses is the one who gets to see the land. There's no record of Aaron climbing the mountain and seeing the land before he dies. He dies, in a sense, in complete loneliness, although he's accompanied, of course, by his son and his brother. But Moses gets to see the land, and it remains for him a land of promise because it will not be unsullied by history. As we know, not only from the Bible, history is often very messy. It doesn't move at the pace that we'd like it to move, and almost every step forward results in a step sideways or half a step back, sometimes more than a step back. And here we can imagine Moses getting a pristine vision of the land. Now, the question, of course, is whether that's enough to comfort him or to sustain him. And I think most of us think that it isn't, because he's been driven these 40 years by wanting to go into the land, and he doesn't get to do that.
It's such a remarkable scene. I'm thinking of so many different kinds of images in my mind. Recently on a recent trip to Israel, we were up in the Golan, and we were up on a very high mountain. And you know how they have these binoculars, these you look through. It's a big, huge thing. You look through, and they're set up there. And you can see into Syria. Now, of course, I have no desire to go into Syria. And no longing there, and there's the idea of a boundary, the going up to and seeing it reinforces the idea that you are on this side and you are not going on that side. And whenever we do that kind of tourism or sightseeing, and we are in a place where we have these kinds of binoculars, or we're seeing certain things from a distance, we are so conscious and aware of the boundary in front of us. So I wanted to reflect on this, just in terms of there's both joy, but there's also tremendous longing. He wants to be there. He wants to go in there on foot. I don't know, Jeremy, you relate to that?
Well, the foot word is a very key word, because there's a motif about walking. Kum hitalech ba'aretz, God tells Abraham, when God promises Abraham that he will, have as a possession Eretz Yisrael. Kum hitalech ba'aretz, walk through the land. There's when you walk through someplace, it's like you make a claim. And Barry mentioned, and we were talking beforehand, that Joshua, when Joshua, who will be the general who leads the conquest, wherever your feet land, that's will belong to you. If you arrive in it, you can make a claim to it. Moshe Rabbeinu never gets there. Moshe Rabbeinu is the symbol of, journey towards a fulfilled, but he doesn't get to destiny. There's no destiny for Moshe Rabbeinu. And, one of the things the Bible loves is talking about burial in an ancestral tomb. Moshe is buried, we don't know where, right? He's V'lo yada ish et kivurato. Nobody knows where he's buried. So Moses is portrayed in, this passage points towards it, and the end of Deuteronomy will point towards it, even more fully. Moses is a character whose Torah shapes us, but who himself as an individual never arrives. I find this as a religious motif very effective and moving, because life is more about the journey than the arrival. However, I can certainly see, especially in the context of 20th century or 21st century Zionism, that the never arriving Ba'aretz, is like that could be anti the fulfillment and bitsuist, accomplishment oriented ethos of modern political life.
What about the fact, one of the things that occurs to me that Moses might be desiring upon entry into land is not to be a tourist in the sense that we are tourists when we go, and we who live outside the land of Israel, but to see ancestral places, to see important places. After all, he is aware that God revealed himself to Abraham there. God had this very, very close relationship to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the land of Israel. They are buried there. Maybe he wants to see their graves. Maybe he wants to see different places. And of course, I'm projecting a certain desire on him, but it's not only I want to see, certain landmarks. I want to be where this land is, because this land is special. This land is the gift. This land is what was promised. And this is where our ancestors lived.
Is Kehat alive when they go down to Egypt? So, because when you say it in the way you just said it, Levi is Moses' great grandfather. Kehat is his grandfather. So his great grandfather, for sure, was born in Mesopotamia but lived in the land of Israel, and maybe his grandfather also. I don't remember if he's one of the 70 alive or not, but his grandfather also lived really in the land of Israel. So you can think about all the people that we know, even with much less august, like just heritage tours or roots tours or whatever. I went to my grandfather was from Minsk, or my grandfather was from Lvov or whatever, and I want to go see where they were from. I could totally imagine Moshe having that.
Absolutely. These things have a tremendous pull on our imagination. And, it's there within, I don't want to say living memory, but certainly transmitted memory. They're not far from it. The same way that, I feel 3 or 4 generations removed from that experience. These are stories I grew up with. I learned about the shtetl. I learned about Antipol and Kobrin and Grodno and all those places. And I've certainly had a desire to go back and see them, notwithstanding the fact that it's really hard to get to those places. But okay, so here is Moses with an intense desire to see this land, and I would read that verse with the pauses that I've placed in there, which is, you're going to see the land. Pause. And you're going to be gathered to your kin. And so, can we just spend a moment talking about Moses' reaction? Moses, Vayidaber Moshe el Adonai lemor, and I heard a beautiful line on this, is that this is the only place in the Torah that reverses the noun of that verb, Vayidaber Moshe el Adonai lemor. Usually it's Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Here it's Vayidaber Moshe el Adonai lemor. Moses speaks to God, saying, and Vayidaber is, even the way that word sounds, speaking, has a tougher meaning. It's, I speak directly to you instead of Vayomer, which is I speak lightly. Vayidaber is, wait a minute, objection, Your Honor. Vayidaber is, I want to bring something up to your attention. And exactly what is it that he wants to bring? Yifkod Adonai Elhei Ruchot L'chol Basar Ish Al Haida. Let God appoint someone, Elohei Aruchot, Lord of God of all the winds, the spirits. Let him appoint someone, Ish Al Haida. And then
Elohei Aruchot L'chol Basar.
L'chol
you
basar.
you God, either in your vast omniscient wisdom know the spirits of each person. This is a way, I think Rashi says this. This is why you gotta pick a leader who, you know, the spirits of all people. You gotta pick a leader who will be good at finding the right leadership for different people, or just, you know, God who knows that we are all living creatures or something like that. You know all these different ruchot that enliven our flesh. So you have to appoint somebody over the Edah. Yifkod Adonai Elohei Haruchot. Okay, lifkod, remember, take account, note, but actually, it can also mean like a pikudah is a commandment. So Moses could be saying to God, okay, here's the next commandment you got to offer. This is your commandment. This is the next commandment.
It's really, really audacious of Moses. It's perfect for Moses. He's already, taking that initiative to tell God what you need to do, and so God, I mean, and then the beautiful phrase, which is "V'lo tiyeh adat Adonai katzon asher ein lahem ro'eh." The people of God shall not be like sheep that do not have a shepherd. Okay, so in a way, you want to say Moses is projecting himself onto the next leader. And the most gracious reading of this is that Moses cares about the leadership. Moses, here he was told he's going to die, and what do you think, that God is going to leave the people without any leadership? No, Moses says, look, you need to appoint someone. You need to appoint someone who can be the shepherd. You need to appoint someone who will take them in and take them out, lead them into war, and that kind of thing. In other words, you need to take a mini me, right?
Well, there's a subtle irony here, because there's only one shepherd in Israel at this time,
Yes,
and that's Moshe himself,
indeed.
right? So when he says there you should not have a people without a shepherd, he's saying that, I think he's telling God, you can't do this to me
Yeah.
because I am the shepherd.
He wants to hold on, in the Midrash, of course, that talks about his death, has him holding on for dear life with everything he's got to lead. But here I think there is a moment of real grace for Moshe, because he has to accept the fact that he is not going to live forever, and he has to accept the fact that he has a successor, and that his successor is going to be someone who is kind of not like him. Joshua has been a loyal servant, the Sancho Panza to the Don Quixote of Moses. Joshua is obedient, and Joshua is not a terrible risk taker, although he will try and identify himself and define himself, certainly in the book of Joshua. And Moses, God says to Moses, Kach lecha et Yoshua ben Nun. I always like to interpret the lecha, like you said, lech lecha, and there's brach lecha, and here there's kach lecha, take for yourself. And my take on that would be, this it's for you that you need to take him, Moses. It's for
Take in place of yourself.
It's for your sake, you need to have a successor, because your successor will make you look good.
Well, I'm inclined to think, like what you said, the gracious reading of Moshe, that Moshe, for whom God said, at any number of times, I said, I'm killing these people, I'm done with them, I'm going to start again with you, and you're going to be, you're going to be the progenitor. And Moshe always says, it's not about Moshe, it's about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
It's about the ancestors and their covenant. We'll fold in the covenant of the matriarchs as well, but that's not what the Torah actually says. But I'm inclined to like the gracious reading that Moshe says, the Moses who declined to start all over again, the Moses who was willing to be blotted out of God's book because of the people of Am Yisrael, says, you're gonna go to the mount Har Avarim Hazeh. You're gonna go to the mountain of crossing over, and you're gonna stop, and you're not gonna cross over. And Moses says, "All right, pick somebody. I've been good at this. Pick somebody else who can also be good at this." And there's a midrashic thing that is in this passage that expresses the idea of Moses's graciousness, that that God says, "I will v'natata." You should, Moses. You should natatam mehodecha.
Yeah.
Alav. You should give him some of your glory. I don't expect you to give him all of your glory. And then you should place your hand upon him. And Moses does what God commands him, and he lays his hands, plural.
Both hands.
Both hands. So God said, you should let him know he's your designated successor with a gesture of your hand, and Moshe goes both hands.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. That what did Barack Obama say when Donald Trump, if you succeed, we all succeed. And he wasn't happy when he said it. And he said the gracious thing. I think maybe it's something like that too. Moshe knows, listen, I'd rather live forever. What did Woody Allen say? I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality by not dying. So presumably Moshe doesn't want to die, but he says, all right, if you succeed, Yehoshua, we all succeed.
Yeah, and that the beautiful midrash, which is that Mehotcha is, I give him your glory, and the second is I give him also some of mine, right? And that there's a lot of graciousness to him. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, go ahead, Barry. Last word.
It's important to point out why Moshe is giving Joshua his glory, whether we think it's all or some of it, and it's so the people will listen to him.
Indeed.
And one of the things that we hardly ever discuss is whether we think the people listen better to Moshe or better to Yoshua. And it may be that if we take the interpretation that Moses is only giving some of his glory, with less glory, people are going to listen to him because they don't have quite the intimacy that they felt with Moshe when they could argue with him and they could disobey him because they felt that he would still protect them. And it may be that with Joshua, they never felt that way.
That Moses is giving him legitimacy, and the grace that Moses is giving him is that he's not undermining him. And Moses, as we know, obviously could have terribly undermined his successor by delegitimizing him.
But you do also have the idea here of Yeridat Hadorot, like, okay, Joshua bin Nun, great though he is, he's not Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Talmud says, Pnei Moshe ki pnei hachama, pnei Yoshua ki pnei halevana. Moses' radiance was like the sun, and Joshua's radiance was like the moon. Not bad, but a reflection of the sun, and not its own source of radiance.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we have to end it there. There was so much missing in this parsha that we didn't get a chance to talk about, namely the sacrificial calendar, right, which is actually quite interesting. It reminds us of all the things that we recite on holidays, and the Musaf, and the importance of calendar, and the importance of the sacred events, and perhaps this as a way of recalling so much that went on in ancient Israel. But we'll have to save that for a future Parasha Talk on Pinchas. In the meantime, it's been wonderful to be with you. We want to thank you for listening and watching us. We want to wish everyone a beautiful Shabbat, and we'll see you next week on another edition of Parasha Talk. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.